Welcome everybody to the Audit Committee meeting for November 13th, 2020. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you would all join me with the pledge, please. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Before we jump into the meeting, I'd like to ask our clerk to confirm that we have a quorum.
Yes,
Francesca?
Vice Chair, we do have a quorum.
Great. Let's start with approval of the minutes. Any discussion, or would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll move to approve.
A second.
Thank you very much. For the city of La Mesa, I know Chair Baber is not here, so I will mark him as absent. For the city of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Did we lose Vice Chair Wells? Oh, I'm going to move on.
I think we may have. I'll let you know when he comes back.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take the rest of the vote in the meantime. Do we have Paul? Oh, you know what? If Mayor Wells is not on the call, then we don't have quorum anymore.
He's coming back. Just give
Okay.
him 1 second.
Great.
I'm back. I don't know what happened. I think Bill Baber found out I was trying to be called chairman.
All right, Kendall, is Paul on the line as well? Have you seen him log in?
No, not yet.
Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, I'll go ahead and start back at the beginning then. For the city of La Mesa, Chair Baber is absent. For the city of El Cajon, Vice Chair Wells?
Yes.
Thank you. Member Paul Dostart is absent. Member Stuart Halper?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And public member Bob Monson?
Yes.
Thank you. And that does
Great.
pass with the 2 absences.
Francesca, Paul just signed on. He should be coming. So I don't know if you want to get his vote on the record.
Absolutely. Paul, would you like to submit your vote for the minutes?
Can you hear me? I came in on the public link.
Yes, that's the right link. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, that's what I didn't understand. I thought the minutes were fine.
Great. Thank you. So that does pass with 1 absence.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take public comment at this time. Is there any public comment?
I don't see any hands raised from the public.
Okay. Let's see. Any comments from committee members? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to our executive director's report. Hassan?
Thank you, Chair Wells. Good to see you. Good to see all of you. Thank you, members. Just a few items. Obviously, I'm not going to update you on the audit action plan because you're going to hear it next. But I just update you on the 5 priorities of the agency that the agency have. One is on the 5 big moves, the plan. I'm really proud of the team who's been reaching out to the public since we presented to the board a few months ago. This discussion has elevated to a national statewide discussion. Last week, myself and my Chief Data Analytics, Ray Major, and Colleen Clemenson, the Planning Director, presented to 3 state agencies joint meeting, California Transportation Commission's Air Resources Board, and Housing Community Development. I believe the presentation was received well to the point where many people writing and texting about making this a statewide initiative to move forward, how we move forward with a multimodal approach to a transportation system while increasing capacity but reducing the greenhouse gas emission and vehicle mile travel. I just want to inform you that this vision that we presented to the board a couple of months ago is going to become a draft plan that will be released to the public in April. So that's the first priority. The second priority the agency has was Otay Mesa 2. We have several meetings at the high level with our Mexican partners, including the Secretary of Transportation and Communication in Mexico. I have a meeting with our ambassador in Mexico City and with the Mexican ambassador in Washington, D.C. All of these meetings pointed to the fact that there is real commitment on the Mexican side to move Otay Mesa 2. That's why we established 2024 to be the date when we cut ribbon for this new border crossings. We think that our Mexican partners can meet that, which means we're going to have to start cutting ground of the facility sometimes in 2022. The third priority is the Del Mar Bluff. We're about to complete the phase 4 of the bluff stabilization. We have an application pending with the state. We were supposed to hear about yesterday, but we're going to hear about Monday. I'm looking forward to hearing a positive feedback from the state. I'm also expecting the funding to complete the short-term stabilization of the bluff. And just to tell the committee that this is just that short-term stabilization until we figure out what to do with the long-term solution of the bluff, which will include moving the bluff inland. And that's something is going to come through the study we're doing. Third priority, the NAVWAR, our work with the United States Navy on the development of the Central Mobility Hub. This is moving well. We were in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago with Mayor Faulkner, met with our partners from the Navy at the Pentagon, just have first executive council meeting with the Navy today. All I can tell you is things are moving in the right direction. And finally, the fourth priority in having data and open data is well underway. Just want to inform you that we have held many tours for the border crossings with our elected officials and state officials for the Del Mar Bluff. Unfortunately, given where we are on COVID-19, we'll be suspended these tours and all the media events that we planned for the Del Mar Bluff for completion until further notice. Mr. Chair, Mayor Wells, this concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thank you, Director Hassan. Any questions from the public?
No, Vice Chair, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Members, would you like to make any questions or comments? Yeah, Hassan, looks like you're off the hook. So
All right.
have a great afternoon and thank you for the report.
I'm not done yet. I'm going to be speaking to you about the next item.
I do see a hand raised from Stuart, actually.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I
great. Stuart. Hi, Stuart.
apologize. Are we going to do the visual hand raise or the system hand raise, or what's the best way to proceed on that? Well, I'll just shout out if I.
Yeah, just
Hand raise seems to be-
make yourself heard.
Well, thank you, Hassan. I just wanted to mention, I had the opportunity to listen in this morning to the Transportation Committee meeting. And I just want to say how impressive it is that, you and the team are so thoroughly integrating data into the planning process, both to enhance decision-making, but also to enhance understanding of how and why project recommendations are being made. Particularly the discussion on the 52, I thought was really very illustrative of really just what a fabulous job you guys are doing in presenting data as part of your communication. So I just wanted to say kudos to you and the team for really what is, I can't say enough how impressive it is.
Thank you. And it's really more the team than me, sir, but thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, then. Thanks again, Hassan. We will move on. Item number 4 is an update from the Office of the Independent Auditor. Mary, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
It's all yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to give a quick update on the office. We are moving out of and wrapping up the QC review and work paper closure of the salaries and compensation audit. Staff is doing some administrative work that they've kind of delayed due to the audit. getting caught up on some required training, and moving on to start the program and planning for the contracts audit. With that, I've also completed, with much excitement, finally, the risk assessment report has been finalized and is in the hands of my staff to do a review. Once the review is done, we're going to hand it over to Hassan and let him do his review and provide comments, and also to the risk assessment audit subcommittee that was assigned. That would be Paul and Stuart. We'll be sharing that report with them as well. And really the next steps around this would be, it's an internal document, an internal report that will be shared with Sandag staff, and Hassan and I will do that together. And then I will be working with Hassan and the risk manager of Sandag to help develop and design a heat map based on the results of the report. Now, mind you, this report is solely coming from management. It's the participants. We're all staff members and management and directors that participated and identified risks throughout the organization. And we did some data analytics using that information. And then we'll sit, like I said, and share the detail and such with Hassan and the risk manager of Sandag, working to create a heat map for management. So it's really management's assessment of risk. There may be areas where they've mitigated already, and areas that they may have not even thought about and want to mitigate. So that will be the next steps, and that will probably be happening around December. So I'm happy to say that is done on our end, other than working with Hassan and the risk manager. And that's all.
Mary, thank you very much. Are there any public comments on this item?
I don't see any public comments.
How about comments from the committee?
Yeah, just a comment to Mary. Having myself, as when I was an auditor, gone through one of those risk assessments, it's a huge task. Organizational risk assessment is always something that takes a lot of time. So congratulate you, congratulate your staff, and congratulate management as well, because it's a significant time drain for management, but it's an important thing to do. And my question to you, Mary, and you may have answered this already, is who's going to be responsible for monitoring the risk assessment as you moving forward? You're going to create a heat map. Who's responsible for monitoring that?
Well, really, I think overall risk management is the responsibility of management. But with that being said, I think Hassan can jump in and agree or expand. I think it's a joint, kind of a joint project that works best, because I have assessed it from an audit risk standpoint and designed my audit plan around it. But then Hassan has a responsibility to manage risk from a management's perspective. And I think working sort of the bridge I see, and Hassan can agree or expand, is the risk manager of the organization working jointly as sort of the bridge between my office and management to identify where they believe the tolerance of those risks are and the mitigation around it. So really after that, this heat map should be an ongoing monitoring by both management and support from OPA.
So I agree with everything that Mary said, and I appreciated the conversation I had, Mary and I had yesterday. Obviously, as I told you before, while we're independent, but we have one goal, and that is to build a world-class organization that has the controls that's needed. Mary and I agree on that 100%. So we'll move it together as a team, and we'll make sure that at the end of the day, Mary thinks that we met all the criteria we need to meet on the risk. But it's actually the way I look at it, we're going to move it as a team and make sure the risks are minimized or eliminated.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you both.
Welcome.
Any other comments from board members? All right, then. Moving on to item number 5, the proposed action plan for the salaries and compensation program audit. For this, I will turn it over to Hassan.
Thank you, Mayor Wells. The committee members, Mary Kay, good afternoon to all of you. It feels like a morning still, I don't know why. But on behalf of Sandag management team, we feel it's time to move forward on this action plan. What you're going to see today is an action plan that produced with the greatest collaboration with Mary Kay and her team. And here I will stop and thank Mary and her team. They've been amazing in collaborating with management in putting this action plan together. I also want to say that as you move forward with the other items today, and make sure what I say is there's no ambiguity in it, that Mary and I have the same goal for Sandag. And she had done a great job in making sure that we work together. Yes, we might disagree, and we had disagreement, but that doesn't mean that we're not working together toward achieving that goal. I also want you to know that Mary and I communicate all the time from the day she started until now. Again, we don't always agree, but we always talk and communicate, and we're gonna create the world-class organization that Sandag deserves to be. I want to thank management, especially Melissa, and Michelle, Lloyd, Ron, and Michael, and Mary for putting this plan together. Obviously, the plan is a plan until it's implemented, and we're going to make sure together that it moves forward. But I couldn't be more grateful for having the independent auditor's office as at Sandag, because from day one, I promised the board and promised you and promised the staff we're going to build a world-class organization. I think we are moving that way. You might have heard disagreements or stumbling here and there. I like what Mary Kay is doing and trying to do in the agency, and we're one team. So with that, with the gratitude to her and her staff, today the staff is going to present to you the action plan, and with that, I'm going to turn it to Ray Trainer to make the presentation, and we'll be available later for questions and answers. I will be leaving at 1 o'clock for the safety committee, but I'll come back later in the meeting. So with that, Ray.
Thanks, Hassan. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Wells and members of the Audit Committee. It's great to be able to talk with you today. Many of you may not be familiar with my role at Sandag, and I'm one of the chief deputies. And I've been working very closely with both Hassan and the management team in the last months, assembling the response to the compensation audit that we're talking about today. I wanted to point out too that there's 3 leaders in the Sandag organization who've been primarily responsible for both developing and then ultimately implementing the proposed action plan once it is reviewed and approved by yourselves and ultimately by the board of directors. But I wanted to call attention to the work of Melissa Kuhlfeldt, the Director of Organizational Effectiveness, Andre Dujon, the Chief Financial Officer, as well as Amberlyn Deaton, Deputy General Counsel. They've been really key in putting all of this together. And really, when we go back to mid-September, immediately following the board's receipt of the salaries compensation compliance audit, the management team immediately began to develop the draft action plan that you have before you today. And this plan comes at a time when the agency's been undergoing transformation on many fronts. The focus here on continuous improvement and the need for us as an organization to adopt effective work practices is being emphasized throughout the organization. Some of you may recall the Plan of Excellence, which was implemented back in 2018 as part of the genesis of the transformation that's been underway. Following that was the Organizational Effectiveness Plan, which was formulated last year, which had followed an assessment that had been requested by the board of directors. And then certainly not at all to be minimized is the work that Hassan has introduced in terms of his focus on us becoming a world-class organization, and his emphasis that we have processes to help continuously improve SANDAG. That emphasis really starts at the enterprise level, what we're talking about today, but it does focus on work at the department level and ultimately as all of us as individuals. It's really an imperative for us at SANDAG to deliver on the quality of the programs, the projects, and the services that the region's depending on us for. Just as an aside from management perspective, you've heard Hassan say on several occasions, even just moments ago, that the emphasis on having stronger policies, better processes, and controls are really going to help us improve as an organization. So all that said, we're embracing the opportunity to make important changes, and this action plan has been assembled really with this deliberate and collaborative approach in mind, that it's our interest to incorporate the comments from yourselves as members of the committee. And you'll find in the draft action plan that we'll step through very briefly that there are a number of locations where we've actually called attention to your recommendations and translated those into proposed action. The plan also reflects the sentiments of the board of directors during their discussion that took place on September 18th. And also, it's helpful to understand that that team of leaders that I mentioned sought the input of all the technical expertise within the organization, working with their respective program managers, both within the Office of General Counsel, within Human Resources, Finance, as well as our Risk Management Office. These teams have collaborated across each of their functional areas to address and really focus on mitigating the risks that were identified in the audit, and to ensure that the coordination that's necessary to be able to implement this plan is really aligned with all the proposed activities and the intents from both the audit, from yourselves, and from the board. This group has also discussed the accountability that's necessary to ensure that all the commitments that we've described in that draft plan are upheld. And this effort to be able to coordinate the completion of this work is going to be the responsibility of the risk program manager. So just in addition to the directors that I've mentioned and the program leads that have put together the plan, Hassan and then our other chief deputy, Jim Linthicum, and I have provided guidance along the way. And the three of us are really focused on continuing to now ensure the successful implementation once this plan is approved by both yourselves and the board. I'd also like to point out, as Hassan indicated, that we've also spent time being able to coordinate with the OIPA staff, and they've helped conduct 2 reviews of this draft plan. They provided comments on a very early draft. Our staff then incorporated the feedback into the next draft plan. And then we prepared the final draft plan, and just within the last week or so, shared that with the OIPA staff. And again, we've made edits in response to the valuable feedback that they've provided. So just as a part of today's brief presentation, I wanted to provide a broad overview and just help step you through that attachment that's a part of your board agenda, and just highlight for you that all the 37 recommendations that were identified in the final audit have been responded to in this draft action plan. 22 of those proposed actions we believe are within management's purview, and they primarily fall within 2 areas, and that is finance and organizational effectiveness. I mentioned collaboration earlier, and the collaboration that's anticipated to occur between our finance, payroll, and our human resources teams and others is reflected in many cases where you're going to see joint ownership of several of those actions. That's that column furthest to the right. Now, staff in these areas have identified the functions and the activities that occur regularly. And the plan is to introduce and integrate improvements that are recommended in this action plan, with either focusing on the development of new or revised policies and procedures, and to evaluate their effectiveness while this work's underway. So to try to illustrate what I mean by that is, if you take a look at recommendation Roman numeral 1.4, that's on page 2 of the plan. This talks about the introduction of new process for employee acknowledgement of the bylaws and the board policies. And that work is really intended to be introduced in conjunction with the release of the next employee handbook, which is targeted for early calendar year 2021. Now, there were 5 proposed actions that involve changes to bylaws, to board policies, and to practices of the board. And the draft plan that's before you reflects our intention to propose those updates to these documents for the board's consideration. This particular work effort is going to be led by the Office of General Counsel team, and that too is anticipated to occur in the first half of calendar year 2021. Now, in addition to those 5 actions that are within the board's purview, there are 2 recommendations that call for a formal investigation of management's actions. You might recall those were recommendations Roman numeral 2.1 and Roman numeral 3.1. That's on pages 4 and 5 of the draft action plan. So from management's perspective, we've stated a commitment and continue to state that we'll fully cooperate with any additional investigations or reviews that may be conducted. However, the timeline for these actions is currently unknown, but the plan will be revised in the future to reflect any information or direction that could be forthcoming from the board as a result of any work that they would direct toward those additional investigations. Now, of the 37 recommendations that were noted in the audit report, there are 8 that are not proposed to be implemented. These are also identified in the plan, along with some brief explanations to be able to explain why. In a few cases, the proposal for no action reflects prior action taken by this committee itself during the consideration of the audit findings, as well as the comments that were received from the board members when they discussed this back in mid-September. So to try to illustrate, if you look at recommendation Roman numeral 8.2, you'll find that on page 13, and recommendation Roman numeral 9.2, that's on page 15. This talks about reverting salaries and vacating executive level positions that were filled by appointment during the agency reorganization. And as discussed previously, the executive director acted within his delegated authority, and there were legal risks and operational disruptions to the agency if we were to proceed with any attempt to try to vacate those positions. So that's one of the examples of a recommendation that we're proposing not to act on. The other recommendations that are not proposed to be implemented have been evaluated from a risk perspective. And in management's opinion, undertaking these recommendations would be a duplication of the work that's already been completed. And that would result in some unnecessary expense to the organization. So to try to illustrate that, if you look at recommendation Roman numeral 7.2, that's found on page 11, there the recommendation was to conduct a job analysis for all agency positions. You might recall, and we discussed this back in mid-September, that SANDAG actually conducted a complete and a comprehensive review and update of its classification program back in 2016. And we maintain this on an ongoing basis. Moving ahead now, per board policy 39, you as the audit committee have the responsibility to oversee the implementation of corrective actions in response to all of the performance audits that are conducted by the OIPA. We anticipate, with respect to this particular audit, that would be brought back to you, this committee, to demonstrate our commitment and the accountability to ensure that all the elements within this proposed plan are implemented. Now, I mentioned internally, management and our program staff are going to meet regularly to plan and coordinate all the implementation activities. It's our understanding that there will also be a periodic status review meeting with the OIPA team as well. As the agency moves forward with the additional audits with the OIPA team, management has noted that the board's direction, in fact, you'll see this on page 17 of the draft plan, that future audit reports never be redacted except for names and personal information. And we wanted to call attention to that because we know that there was a lot of conversation around that, and rightly so. We wanted to bring that to your attention. So in conclusion, on behalf of Hassan and the entire management team at SANDAG, I hope the very brief remarks that I'm providing for you today are helping to convey the seriousness as well as the intent to be a partner and a collaborator to help coordinate all the completion of the elements within this draft plan and our approach around continuous process improvement. We're confident that the implementation of the policies, the practices, and the controls that were described in the action plan are really going to help make Sandag become a more effective organization. And we're committed to making all the necessary changes to ensure that the plan is implemented completely. So with that, the team of Melissa, Andre, Amberlyn, and myself are available to answer any questions you may have. And that concludes my preliminary comments, Mr. Vice Chair, and I'll turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the committee, are there any public comments on this?
Vice Chair, I don't see any hands raised.
All right, let's open it for discussion to the committee members. Anybody want to jump in?
I'll go ahead and kick it off. Thank you, Ray, for the excellent presentation. Just a couple of things that I wanted to comment on. I heard the word collaboration several times, not only through Ray's, but also Mary, Hassan, and I appreciate that. I having been an auditor in my past life, collaboration was always something that I sought after, because quite honestly, the auditor's work is tough and it isn't easy. And without collaboration, doesn't matter what kind of findings you come up with, doesn't matter what the recommendations are if nothing happens with them. And collaboration becomes very important between the auditor and management. I really appreciate seeing that. The second comment, or the second thing I heard from Ray was about risk analysis, looking at the risk on each one of these kinds of findings. And again, that's important to me because management is the one that's responsible regarding risk. They are the ones that are responsible for determining, well, is the risk high enough for us to make a change? Is it low enough? The auditor is responsible for pointing it out, the findings. And that's why I don't have necessarily a huge problem with a recommendation that's not implemented, because management has reviewed the risk to that and determined that it's low. But I want to make sure that management also understands they take on that risk, that if something should happen, they don't get to point the finger back to the auditor, that it's management. And I appreciate that. So I think those are really the two comments that I wanted to make. Again, I appreciate the presentation, Ray. The report I thought was very thorough. Question that I have for Mary. I want to ask and I'm going to put this question in the right way, because you and your staff had an opportunity to review. And one of the tasks of the auditor in reviewing management's response and their plan, if you will, their action plan is that action plan covering the risk? And so that's what I'm asking you. In your determination, the determination of your staff, do they cover the risks?
I believe that Michelle, she may want to jump in here. She was actually the auditor in charge of, because it was her audit, going and thoroughly reviewing the corrective action plan and providing some additional input. One thing I was happy to see is that there were some dates assigned. I think that was one of the areas that I noted, that they actually assigned some specific dates, because unless that's present, then it's kind of open to just who knows when, right? And that never really is helpful. So they did do that. I believe the plan is pretty thorough, and addresses a majority of the risk identified. As you heard Ray say, of course, from an audit perspective, we identified several recommendations that we believed had risk associated with it, that they believed they've either mitigated or are willing to accept. And again, as you pointed out, Bob, that's management's right, is to accept the risk or the tolerance, have that tolerance for the risk. So other than those areas, I believe that the corrective action plan will help mitigate much of the risks that were identified.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chair, that's all I have. That's the only comments I make. And if there's a motion, I can make a motion.
That'd be great.
Okay, so I motion that we accept management's action plan.
I believe Stuart has his hand up. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Oh, okay.
he has a hand up there. I noticed.
Stuart, just or anybody, just vocally weigh in. So it's hard to see with these little tiny boxes.
Yeah, sorry. And I don't know if Paul or somebody else wanted to speak, but if not, I have a couple of comments, questions, and I'll be happy to add to Bob's motion. Or in any case, just first comment, really great to see everybody come together on this. It really is very comprehensive, well thought out, very constructive plan. My first question is a very general one, and well, actually, I guess it's really more of a comment. And that is, very much appreciate, Ray, how you've called out in your presentation to us where there were recommendations that management chose not to follow. That's really appreciate the clarity on that. But in the future, it would be helpful if the action plan author, subcommittee, whomever, for areas where I think you're not disagreeing with the auditor, just to try to mirror perhaps a little bit more closely the OIPA recommendation language. And it's fine to add granular action steps that elaborate, as appropriate. Because, frankly, in some cases, at least for me, it was a little bit difficult to determine how closely or not the proposed action, in fact, lined up with the OIPA recommendation. My sense is in that most of those instances you're agreeing, but when you have such very different, language between the two, if you're just looking at the table between those two columns, it just, it would be helpful to have a little bit more clarity. And look, it's been described, it's fine to have differences. As you did in your opening remarks, it's really great to make sure that there's clarity when you do have differences. Mm-hmm. So maybe just take that as a sort of a comment. But then just a couple of questions. One of process, Mary, Ray, whomever wants to jump in, will it be the OIPA who marks their calendar with the action steps timetable and maintains dialogue, perhaps, Mary, between your staff and the Sandag staff to periodically update yourselves as well as us on the project progress according to the timetable?
Well, for OPA, Stuart, on a quarterly basis, we have a standard practice in our office that we will follow up on any corrective action plans that came as a result of our audits. And so we will go back to their corrective action plan on a quarterly basis. We'll ask for an updated plan in case the dates have been changed for whatever reason. And then we will compare that in any areas in which it identified as being completed. We will look for evidence of that completion. And also the efficiencies and effectiveness. So was it the right, did it address the problem? Did it resolve the problem? And what document or process came out of that? And if it met the timeline. And so that would be what we would bring then on a quarterly basis to the audit committee.
Great, thank you. That would be very helpful. And then just last question, this is a little bit granular, but regarding findings 2 and 3, in both cases, the recommendation number 1, I was under the impression that there was a mutual agreement that we didn't really need to do another legal review. And I was actually prepared to propose as part of our motion that we recommend the board reconsider their intent to hire yet another outside counsel. So maybe you guys could help me understand where we are in that question.
I think I'll let Hassan speak on this as well, but I think Hassan and I have always agreed on this legal aspect of things. For us, there was never a question of the legality around this audit. I think from the beginning, we've always agreed from the legal prospects that came about. There was never a disagreement there. And I think Hassan and I have spoken about this. The fact that they want to continue to bring in additional cost around legal teams and attorneys, to me, and I've expressed this at the board meeting as well, would really be a waste of public funds. And I really would hope and encourage that they would not go down that alley when there really is no point in it. I mean, it's sort of a pointless point. So Hassan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything Mary and I spoke. We feel that there is already 3 legal reviews have been taking place. It cost us about $82,000 to do all the reviews. I don't think, like Mary said, a 3rd or a 4th legal review will add any value. I think Mr. Dastat would agree that, you know, and Mary agreed with the conclusions of the first one. Obviously, the board, as staff, we move the board direction seriously, but it really be good for the board to hear from you what you feel. But Mary and I feel the same way. I think we all are using public funds and we need to protect them, and this is not the best use of them. At the end of the day, so we'll follow what direction we get from the board.
Well, thank you. Because in that case, you know, and Bob, if your motion was going to be that we accept the plan, I would offer a friendly amendment that as part of our recommendation to the board in not only accepting this plan, also that the board reconsider the decision to pursue additional legal review. Obviously, it's their right to, but it sounds like we've got, you know, Sandag Management as well as the OIPA both agreeing with regard to legal matters. And it's just not clear what a 3rd, 4th, or whatever number it is legal review brings to the table. So
I'd be supportive of that. Bob, did you want to clarify?
Yeah, I don't, we can certainly update my original motion and make sure that that gets included regarding the continuing legal investigation. I don't know if Paul has anything he would like to add to that, but I'm okay with that motion.
Paul, did you want to weigh in?
I'm just curious. I guess this would go to either Hassan or Ray. I did hear the board meeting where the board voted to direct that management or John Kirk or somebody go out and hire and get another lawyer. I would have thought that's already occurred. It has not occurred.
So that to clarify, the board directed us to go to the executive committee and talk about the scope and the mechanism of hiring another legal review. And we were planning to do that on the 6th, but the meeting got canceled. Now, when you take this action, whatever it is, we're going to discuss that on the 20th. Because the direction is to discuss with the executive committee the scope and of this and where the money is going to come from. And we will do that. But I'm hoping that with your action today, the board will reconsider if that's your action. But no, we did not hire. Correct.
Hassan, that's helpful. I like the tenor of Bob's amended motion. My concern was we're rushing in to tell the board to not do something they've already done, and that just looked like scrambled eggs. So
Correct.
if they have not undertaken, then I'm
Correct.
very supportive of Bob's amended motion.
All right, we have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second, I suppose, with my friendly amendment.
Oh, I'll take a second to make the second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. You'd like to take the roll call?
Thank you very much. For the record, for the city of La Mesa, Chair Baber is still absent. For the city of El Cajon, Mayor Wells,
Yes.
Thank you. Public member Paul Dostart.
Yes.
Thank you. Public member Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Thank you. And public member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And that does pass with the one absence.
Thanks very much. Now on to item number 6, the audit review process. I'll turn it over to committee member Stuart Halpern.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I also wanted to thank everybody for docketing this item. If we could go to the first slide, perhaps. I just put together a couple of slides just to guide the conversation. So first question is why should we have this conversation? And as I reviewed the documentation, the OIPA has its procedure for communicating auditor reports. We approved that, I think sometime in the summer. It's available on the website. We've got board policy 39 talks about our general responsibilities. But the committee process itself for reviewing the reports really hasn't been codified. And, frankly, just my personal opinion, if we go back to our September 11th meeting, we did it in a little bit of an ad hoc-ish kind of way that I'm not sure really well served, the board or the public. And so that's why I thought it would be helpful for us to have some conversation just to clarify what our process should be. And then if we can go to the next slide, please. So the way this gets to us, right, is that the audit committee docketing, public posting, that's all consistent with the previously approved procedure. But for the audit committee meeting for which the report is docketed, I proposed a couple of simple steps here. First, that the OIPA present the summary of the findings and the recommendations. Management then have the opportunity to comment on their concurrence, differences of any. And then, simply after that, with public comment, committee Q&A, we have a vote. And if you go to the next slide, please, I'll just try to succinctly summarize a way that I think we might want to consider how we vote on this stuff. The first is that we consider whether or not to accept the report, the findings, and the recommendations, full stop. On the other hand, as I think we had last time, there were different points of view about some components of the report, what have you. We could also vote to accept the report and the findings, but we could request, there might be some requested modifications or comment on some of the specific aspects or recommendations. And I think if we keep to a very simple, straightforward process like that, then our communication to the board and to the public will be a lot more clear. And then final thought, just that third bullet point there, somewhat with Supreme Court decisions, I thought, it might be helpful to the extent that we do have situations where we don't have unanimous votes, where for helping the board understand the thinking of the committee, that perhaps the minority, if you will, be given an opportunity to include in the report to the board a very brief explanation regarding their dissent. So that's really it. This frankly is pretty much consistent with other audit committee review processes for other committees I've been on. But I just want to throw it out there as something that to guide ourselves and future committees, we might want to actually take the step of codifying.
Stuart, are you looking for comments, or Mr. Mayor Wells, are we to give comments?
You can give all the comments you like.
Stu, the one thing on the slide that's on the screen now, that's the continued one, it might be slide 3 or 4. The one thing I would suggest in the top left-hand corner where it's got in blue, accept the report findings or accept the report, but with modifications. If there could be maybe the first one changed or add a third, which would be to receive the report. And the reason is I'm focusing only on the difference between the word accept and the word receive. And it may be the case in a situation that the report is too voluminous and I haven't, personally, I'm thinking to myself, had a chance to read a 140-page report in 3 days' time or something. You know, this is a volunteer job. And so if the word were to receive the report, to me, that connotes a suggestion of acknowledging safe receipt, but not accepting in the sense of joining in with before I've really had a chance to read or digest it. So it's a slight wording issue only, Stu.
Well, I don't know if Mayor Wells has a perspective as a board member as well as committee member, but I guess I specifically referenced the notion of voting on whether to accept or not out of what I interpret as our duty to the SANDAG board as an advisory committee to advise them. So I have great sympathy for your comment. I guess I would characterize that perhaps more as a timing of the docketing, but I would hope we all agree that ultimately we have a responsibility to the SANDAG board and to the public to provide our guidance and recommendation on these matters.
Stuart, this is Bill. When you say accept the report, do you see that as kind of a perfunctory issue where we're really just automatically accepting the report so that we can send it on to the board for review?
I think of it as a bit more than that. I think, look, you know, as Mary, I'm sure will say, you know, her report is her report. But I think the notion of us formally voting to accept it, in effect, sort of blessing it, its completeness, its thoroughness, things of that nature, I would think that is part of what the board looks for this committee to do. So rather than just, you know, be a passive kind of flow through, that we're affirmatively telling the board that we have reviewed it. We may have some things where we have comments, disagreements, but that we accept the report as achieving what it's intended to achieve, as a valid, well done audit of the division enterprise that is being audited.
All right. You know, I have the least experience in auditing, but it seemed to me where we may have gotten a little bit off track was it didn't seem to me that the audit committee's role was to dissect the report like we did. And the role was more to, in an organized fashion, accept the report and pass it on to the board, and to maybe distill it down for the board so they could quickly take a bite out of that without going through the whole process. Is that correct, or am I wrong on that?
This is Mary Kay. I have to agree absolutely with you, Mayor Wells. That is correct. And that's why I looked at and had a discussion with Stuart regarding these extra steps. And I believe that these statements are appropriate, that it is the audit committee's responsibility to sort of dive in and understand in a deeper sort of sense, and also express and make suggestions around recommendations, either agreeing or disagreeing, that kind of helps move it forward to the board with that kind of breakdown. So the board doesn't have to not have anyone's opinion or thought other than the auditors. And so I think it would be helpful, these recommendations.
Having said that, going back to Paul's recommendation of having accept and also having the option to receive, do you have any issue with that?
I think receive is something, and this is where John or Amberlyn can jump in. I think the board is the only one that receives. I think the subcommittees are really just there to accept and move forward. So I'll let legal, or if Hassan knows that. I think that word receive is not an appropriate word.
And I think that we've looked at this issue before, and that the acceptance does include some aspect of endorsement for a particular purpose. So there is a slight distinction there between receiving the report and accepting the report.
So what would be the most appropriate for a subcommittee to, and we're parsing this down pretty far, but should we have the word receive in this, or should we leave that to the board?
Well, and again, I would just ask you perhaps to think about your position as a board member. Let's make believe you're not on this committee, right?
Okay.
You're getting something that's being presented to you. Look, I'm not on this board, I'm on other boards. I guess putting myself in the position of a board member, I would like to know, to use Amber Lynn's word, whether there's an endorsement that's coming out of this committee who is comprised presumably based on some expertise, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I think that the notion of endorsement that goes along with the word accept is the more relevant operational word.
Well, I can tell you from my experience on board, being on this board and other boards, I would not necessarily see the word as accept as being a full endorsement. I would see it as the subcommittee had seen that everything was in order and there was no reason not to accept the report and pass it on. So
I agree with that, Mayor Wills. I think Mary's right too. I mean, except if you recall, when we went to the board for the audit action, there were two motions, and one said review, accept, and one, and they thought it meant the same to the board members. So I agree with Mary's assessment of this.
okay, so I'm comfortable with leaving things the way they are if the rest of the committee is.
I know for me that I'm comfortable with leaving it as accept. I mean, the job of the audit committee is not just to receive the report, but also to dive into the report, ask questions both of Mary and her group, ask questions of management, suggest modifications if necessary. Have justification for that, and then all of that gets sent to the board. That's what I see as the audit committee's job here. So I'm comfortable with leaving accept. I don't know if it could be something vote options for the committee will be to accept and consider the 3 steps. I don't know, but I like the word accept. Myself.
I would just like to, one word that points out at me, and I like Bob's word a little bit better, is the second that says accept the report and findings, but with requested modifications. I would like suggested modifications rather than requested modifications.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, and then the rest of it, I'm completely, and let's remind ourselves that this is an internal policy. It doesn't go to the executive committee or the board. It's really our internal processes. So I would just basically, once you guys voted on this, I would take these additional steps and incorporate them into our internal policy that's on the website.
And just so we're clear, I think Mary and I discussed this briefly, and I think our Amber Lynn will say, so part of the policy for whatever plans to go to the board, but in this case, we will take some form once we decide and how we move forward. We'll eventually take it to the board, but at this stage, I don't think they need to be involved. So once we have the bridge that Mary talked about, and once we develop the plan, then after that, we'll take it to the board because we're required to do that. But at this stage, I agree with Mary. I think it's not going to the board executive committee. This is mostly an internal working document.
Great. Well, I'm comfortable with that. If everybody else is, feel free to jump in. I have a question from Amber Lynn. Do we need to take a vote on this, or it is just a
I guess
consensus.
what was in my head, if I couldn't, first of all, I'm totally comfortable and agree with the rationale for changing the word requested to suggestion. I think that the spirit here, from my point of view, is that it's not up to us to unilaterally in any way think we can change the report. But my thinking was that we formally adopted as our process.
Mhm.
Whether it has to go to be blessed by anybody other than us, I'd leave that to others. But so I guess I would say I would make a motion that we accept this as our process, our internal process.
Motion on the table. Is there a second?
I would second.
All right, let's please vote.
Are you gonna call for discussion first, Mayor Wells?
I thought we were in the middle of that, but certainly if people like to discuss it more, please feel free.
Thank you. So Stuart and Bob, if you worked on this one as well, I think it's very thoughtful. I will be voting no on it because I would think that to shackle the committee going forward with only these two statements, which, as our counsel has told us, connote endorsement unless you have affirmative modifications to suggest, is too tight. I would have preferred that this have a third foil, which would be to receive the report, findings and recommendations, as well as the two that are there. So Stuart and Bob, with great appreciation for your effort, I'll vote no. I like it. I just think it's shackles the committee too much. Thank you, Mayor Wells.
I really can't comment on that as much. I don't have that much experience with auditing, so I'll leave it to the other auditors on the group to I could go either way on that.
Well, you've got 3 CPAs on the panel here, so you're with you. So
Been here a while.
yeah, if it comes down 3-1, doesn't bother me. We'll go forward and live with the rules. I just think it's unwise for the committee.
Well, we've got a motion on the table in a second. Unless anybody wants to make a modification to their motion, I'll call for a vote. Doesn't sound like a modification is coming, so let's call for the vote.
Thank you. For the record, for the city of La Mesa, Chair Baber is absent. For the city of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. For the, public member Paul Dostart.
Votes no.
Thank you. Public member Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Thank you. And public member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That does pass with 1 no and 1 absence.
Thank you, everybody. Item number 7 is the independent performance auditor evaluation. This will be introduced by committee member Bob Monson. Bob, are you there?
I am there. I'm here.
Okay, take it away.
Let's see. Do we have the PowerPoint?
Vice Chair Wells, I don't know if you heard the conversation prior to the meeting starting, but Mary did want to make a statement about this item. So I don't know what order you'd like to take that in, but just wanted to make you aware.
Mary, would you want to start with the statement first or after?
Just a blanket statement first, if I can.
Please.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank OPA staff, Sandag's executive director and leadership team, as well as their staff and the numerous board members and audit committee members that took time and effort to provide me with some constructive feedback. I promise you I will take this feedback and grow from it. I wanted to share my perspective and state that even though this performance evaluation was requested by the audit committee chair and only after OPA had issued their first audit, which was 18 months into my 2-year employment and 6 months past my 1 year, that I have and will continue and support and welcome the process. I want to thank the audit subcommittee members who took a lot of their time and commitment to having this review performed as independently as possible. I will also share that my review was handled unlike any other Sandag's executives. The participants included Sandag executives, the executive director, staff, board members, and audit committee members, and most importantly, my staff. Given my understandable concern that certain people would be evaluating me and that might likely impact my overall scores, rather than ask that they not participate, and this was my option that the subcommittee gave me, I wanted to ensure that I walked my talk in regard to being unbiased, transparent, and accountable. Yes, I was concerned that there might possibly be bias that could potentially harm my evaluation, but not having them participate would have made me appear biased myself. Therefore, I chose to rise above the situation and hope that those individuals would follow their own moral and ethical, personal and professional codes and be fair. And for the most part, I believe they were. Regardless of the outcome, it is what it is. I wanted to thank everyone who participated and hope that moving forward, they too would be willing to undertake this type of transparent process and participate in a similar review that I had. I think it's important that we not only get the perspective of those that we supervise, those that supervise us, but also people that work alongside us and other stakeholders. I may have been treated distinct and separate than others during this evaluation, but rather than look at it as being treated differently, I'd like to look at it as creating a path that others will follow, making a space for us all to grow, making Sandag even more successful. With that, though I have been provided with just an overall score, I have not been provided with actual feedback or comments. I think the overall point of a performance evaluation is not to gain an overall percentage score, but to gain an overall understanding of the detailed comments that I can then take and help frame areas that I can possibly grow in. We all have room for growth, and this evaluation will hopefully provide me with that opportunity to learn and grow from. And again, thank you all for participating. That's all.
Thanks, Mary. I do appreciate that. Bob, are you ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready to go. And I'll start it off by just saying thank you, Mary, for the comments. Thank you for participating in this. To everyone out there, having, again, my prior life, I was an auditor. My prior life, I went through these kind of evaluations. They're not easy. They take a lot of courage on the part of the person being evaluated, as well as those that are participating, to be honest, to give good, firm, honest feedback. And I think that's what we have here. So if we can go to the next slide, just as a kind of a little bit of background for the benefit of the public and those that may not have been a part of what this committee has been tasked with. First of all, we've been tasked with performing the annual performance evaluation of Mary. In this case, at Mary's request, this performance review and report is being discussed in an open meeting. Secondly, the audit committee is tasked with concluding whether the performance was satisfactory. Go to the next slide, please. That next slide is kind of, I'm going to use the word that us auditors use a lot. They're the criteria upon which that this evaluation is based upon. First, we have Board Policy 39, Section 3.1, that stipulates as a responsibility of the Audit Committee that we are responsible for conducting the IPA's annual performance evaluation. Second criteria really is found in the IPA's contract, Section 4.2, again, where it requires the Audit Committee to not only perform an evaluation of her performance, but also to determine whether her performance has met a satisfactory rating. Next slide. On October 23rd, at the Audit Committee's closed session, the Audit Committee passed a motion approving the proposed evaluation criteria, the process and timetable that we're going to go over with you right now. As a part of this, the audit committee, as Mary had kind of alluded to, had created a subcommittee that was composed of Stuart Halpern and myself. Since neither one of us are HR professionals and really have never done one of these kind of evaluations, we needed to go outside and bring in a consultant. We went through a very rigorous methodology of interviewing, scoring 5 different firms that had submitted bids for this project. We landed on the consultant that helped us, Linda Shoup. And the reason for that is she far outweighed the other firms with her experience in consulting and providing these kinds of evaluations in public sector at the executive level. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to Linda, and she will go through the criteria, the process, the data, and the results that had occurred. So Linda, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Bob. And I'd just like to start by thanking both Bob and Stuart for being incredibly helpful and letting everybody know that Mary also was involved. Oops, can we have the next slide? Mary, thank you. Mary also was involved multiple points in time. And I took, just on my professional code of standards, I took the opportunity in the middle of October to go downtown and spend a couple of hours with Mary face to face with masks on, 6 feet apart. And I met her staff and was able to actually know the person that the report was going to relate to. And I think that's an important aspect that I wanted to call to your attention. This wasn't somebody that I had never, interacted with. And thank you, Mary, for making time for that. I think it was really beneficial. So this process and timetable, if you recall that the prior motion was made at the October 23rd audit committee meeting, what had happened before that was the research into what are the criteria for evaluating an independent performance auditor. Since that was defined in Board Policy 39 and in Mary's contract, it was defined without specific evaluation criteria. So I went on a research mission, and you'll see the 5 that we came up with in order to evaluate the performance to determine if it reached the satisfactory level. On October 15th, we decided and had some conversation. That was actually the day I went downtown to meet Mary too, and determined the respondents to be interviewed and to complete the survey. In the long run, there were we invited all 5 committee, audit committee members, 10 board members, 16 internal staff and managers, and 3 outside peers that Mary had identified as those that she interacted the most with inside of Sandag and that she used as peer reviewers outside of Sandag. We checked in with HR and tried to involve the HR vice president as much as possible, although that information was incredibly useful, and I appreciate that, Melissa. On the 19th, I did 5 interviews with the audit committee members because I wanted to be sure that those folks that would be recommending and passing any motions had seen the data before we went, not the data, had seen the questions and the criteria before we continued on. Then at the October 23rd audit committee meeting, as Bob mentioned earlier, the motion to approve those 5 criteria, the process and the timetable, which is this page, was approved. After that, there were 31 key stakeholders that we invited to take the survey. The survey had 22 quantitative questions. Did I say 22? Quantitative questions on it, which was 3 to 5 questions under each of the 5 categories. And the interviews provided an opportunity for me to add some flesh onto the bones of the statistical analysis, which I believe is very important, and have done that for all the 30 years that I've been doing this. It's hard to quantify qualitative data, so it doesn't turn into any statistical analysis, but I want to assure you that both subcommittee members and myself went through a count to verify that the interview data and comments match the percentage of the not exactly, but in the range of the percentage of the quantitative data that was reflected in the survey. And indeed it did. All 3 of us did an individual count and came up with a very close result that reflected in the percentages that you're about to see. So I'm actually really proud of that, because that means there's not a difference in what people, not a statistically significant difference in what people shared with me and how they rated on the survey. Around November 6th, back and forth a couple of days, we analyzed and synthesized the data. I did most of that. And we had a meeting, which was last Friday, with Mary to share the data with her, so that she could see, and I'm glad you had an opportunity and spent the time with us, Mary, to take a look at how the data would be aggregated and presented today. And now we are here, and I'm about to present information as to the fact that Mary met or exceeded the standard of satisfactory in every area. So if you could please, any questions on that? I don't know if I'm supposed to ask questions now, but okay, thank you very much. So the approved criteria in the motion that was passed on October 23rd are the 5 that you see here: independence, objectivity, and integrity, technical expertise in government auditing, which is GAGAS, and office. The other thing that we thought was important as the subcommittee and the consultant was that Mary be evaluated not just on the one report that was the most recent deliverable, but on how she came in from the beginning, set up the office for 18 months, did the risk assessment, and became part of SANDAG overall. That was criteria number 3. Number 4 is communication ability, and number 5 was leadership and teamwork. The data that was actually gathered was, we sent 31 surveys, because if you recall, there were 3 external peers. We did not send surveys to those peers. Of the 31 surveys that were completed, that were invited, 27 were completed. And I believe that's in the 80% range. Usually a statistician would accept 70% as a valid sample. So I also feel that collectively we did a good job. And I want to thank Francesca for helping me get that out to the board members and reminding them to complete it. Of the 34 people that were invited to be interviewed, 25, and actually a late breaking interview occurred last night. It's not in these numbers, but 25 people, or 26, were interviewed, and that included the 5 audit committee members. And the way I wrote this was 5 additional board members, because 2 of the audit committee members are also board members. And last night's interview was a board member. So a representative sample was indeed gathered, and the focus was on people that had the greatest level of interaction with Mary and her first 18 months, as well as her audit report. I interviewed 13 out of 16 invited internal staff and managers, which includes executives, and 2 of the 3 peers. One of the outside peers was a federal level retired person that I'm not sure we had the right email for, but the other 2 were internal auditors at different cities in Southern California that had worked side by side with Mary in previous assignments. Next, please. Okay, so the criteria that you saw on the previous page are these right here. And it took a while for us to be clear on what these numbers, these are numerators and denominators. And the reason the denominator differs is because there were different numbers of questions under each of these 5 categories. And one of the responses was no opportunity, no basis to rate. Sometimes we call that no opportunity to observe. So, for example, there were 3 questions here, and what we're looking at is the number of people who strongly agreed or agreed with a neutral statement, which was a subset of how the criteria was defined. So in case you're wondering how we got this, this is simple addition of all the numbers of responses. If everyone had answered every question, there would have been over 500 responses, but people skipped or had no basis to rate. On the numerator, these are the people who strongly agreed or strongly disagreed, so it is simple addition. I'm biased against averaging averages that then get re-averaged to come up with some sort of conclusion. So we did total count, I did, and calculated it with the support of Bob and Stuart. And of the 22 quantitative questions, 347 responses indicated, out of 474, indicated that they agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, which overall, simple division, means 73%. And you can look up here and see that some of the higher numbers relate to accomplishing what was in the work plan and leadership and teamwork. And so it's not an average of these percentages. It is a real piece of data where the numerator divided by the denominator equals 73%. Would anybody like to ask me any questions about this, or should we move on? And one thing I want to say is this is baseline data. It's the first time ever that anybody saw these questions. Nobody had answered them before. It was not criteria provided to Mary as she onboarded that she would be expected to meet or exceed. And so as baseline data, 73% in my professional experience doing this for 30 years, for many of almost all of the San Diego what I call the infrastructure organizations, the airport, the convention center, CCDC, Tourist and Visitors Bureau, that I've had experience with, as well as my private sector clients. This is a far beyond satisfactory in terms of first time out baseline data. So with that, can I clarify anything for anybody on this page? Okie dokie, next page, which might be the last, but let's see. So Bob or Stuart, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this, Linda. Thank you very much for presenting the data. So based on the data that Linda has presented to you, the subcommittee's recommending a motion that first, the audit committee accepts the IPA's performance as satisfactory in accordance with the IPA's contract. And then secondly, that this conclusion be submitted to the Sandag Board of Directors. And Chair Wells, that ends our presentation.
May I ask one quick question? Now that we had the discussion about the terms on the other page, is this the term that was agreed upon by all of you when Stuart was reviewing? I can't flip back to see the other pages, but accepts the same term and carry the same meaning. I just want to be clear on that.
It's an astute observation. I don't think we were focused on the word "except" in this motion in that same way.
But we agreed.
I do think it is consistent that this is not a receipt, that this is we're asking for a proactive endorsement. So in that regard, as we had in the prior discussion of the word "except," I think it's, even though we didn't focus in on it when we constructed this, I think it's consistent and relevant. Thank you.
And I just wanted to really quick thank Linda as well. She has been pretty awesome in this very emotional sort of thing for me, and she's been great. And she's spent a lot of time with me talking through things and helping me understand and calming me down at times. So I just wanted to thank her so much. And again, Bob and Stuart as well. And I appreciate you all.
Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody. A couple questions. Well, I just want to see if any committee members have responses or questions or comments. Okay, then. Would somebody care to then make a motion?
Mayor Wells, if we could give a moment for public comments before we move on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't believe we had public comments for this. Go ahead.
I don't see any hands raised now, but I did just want to give people an opportunity.
I see. Okay. So we have no public comments, right?
No, I think we can go ahead and move on. Thank you.
Okay. Somebody like to make a motion?
Well, I'll go ahead and make the motion as it is stated on this slide, that both the audit committee accepts the IPA's performance as satisfactory in accordance with the IPA's contract, and that this conclusion be submitted to the Sandag Board of Directors.
I would second that.
Thank you. For the record, for the city of La Mesa, Chair Baber is absent. For the city of El Cajon, Vice Chair Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. Public member Paul Dostart.
I'm going to vote no, but I will express concern that our committee acting chair did not call for discussion on the motion as made and seconded, but my vote would be no.
Well, forgive me for that. Again, when I asked if there were any comments or discussion, I thought that took care of that. So if there's any more discussion or comments, I'd be happy to entertain that before we vote.
I'm happy this one's going to come down 3-1. I really liked Mary Kay's opening comments, and thank you very much, Mary Kay. You're right next to me on the screen, so I'm looking at your picture, but I'm very happy with Mary Kay's opening statement. I thought it was great. My concerns and the reason for voting no is, but I'm not, and I'm happy it's going to pass 3-1, I predict, is that it was unclear to me. I don't believe the report that we got, certainly the draft report, did not comply with GAGAS in many, many ways. And what we've heard is, well, this was Michelle's report, I didn't do it. So I don't know if my criticism is a criticism of lack of supervision or otherwise, but those are things that can be changed in the future. So with that, thank you very much, Mayor Wells, for letting me offer that comment. My vote would be no, but I'm very satisfied that if it passes 3-1, that's fine.
And please, Paul or anybody else, if you feel like you haven't had your chance to be heard, just interrupt me. I don't mean to be rude. So you can continue out the vote.
Thank you. Do I need to start back at the beginning, Amberlynn, or should I just continue?
Why don't we start at the beginning, just to
Start at the beginning. Okay, great. Okay, so again, for the record, Chair Baber is marked absent. So for the City of El Cajon, Vice Chair Wells.
yes.
Thank you. And Public Member Paul Dostart.
No.
Public Member Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
Thank you. And Public Member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you. That does pass with 3 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absence.
You know, before we continue, I just want to say that even though it was 2020 was a shaky year, only in the audit committee, everything else was perfect in 2020. I do want to say that I think that Mary is the right person. I'm glad she's here. I'm glad she's staying on. And thank you, Mary, for being with us. Okay. We are coming to the end of the meeting. Item 8 is a continued public comments. And Francesca, are there any more public comments?
No, Vice Chair, I don't see any hands raised.
How about any continued comments from the audit committee members? All right. Our next audit, well, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Can
Oh.
I make a suggestion? And that is, this group of people have defined the terms accept, which kind of includes endorse, versus receive, versus approve. And it would, based on my experience, as people in these roles change, it might be good to document what you all agreed the definition of those terms was. Thank you for allowing me to say that.
Oh, by the way, thank you for all your hard work. Boy, you very professional and very easy to work with. And I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Paul, did you have more to say?
No, I'm going to get a hold of Ray after, if he's still on. I don't see him, but I'll call him afterwards. Ray Trainer, with respect to the threat assessment thing.
Okay, then. So that takes us to the end of the meeting. Our next audit committee meeting has not been scheduled yet, but you will be notified as soon as it is scheduled. And that concludes our meeting. Thanks, everybody. We are adjourned.
Thank you.